Heavy industry has traditionally been a male dominated business sector. However, there are incredible women breaking barriers and making their mark in this field. Join us as we explore the unique challenges faced by women working in heavy industry, the misconceptions they encounter, and the initiatives driving change. Whether you're new to these industries, a seasoned professional, or interested in learning more about the experiences of women in male dominated fields, this episode will provide valuable insights and spark important conversations. Welcome to the Women's Leadership Today podcast, a feature of Women's Leadership Today. I'm your host, Michelle Myers. Today, I'd like to welcome Lynn Kelley, PhD. Dr. Lynn is a senior advisor to Brown Brothers Harriman Capital Partners and serves on the board of directors for Precision Transport Logistics. Lynn retired from the Union Pacific Railroad in 2018 as Senior Vice President of Supply Chain and Continuous Improvement. She is also the co-author of the just-released book, Change Questions, a playbook for effective and lasting organizational change. Lynn, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Michelle. Nice to be here.
Well, Lynn, to get us started, can you tell us more about your career journey and your background in railroad and heavy industry?
Of course. So I did not have a direct path. I started off when I was young, I was in a band. I played in a band, and I was a bit of a hippie. And then by 28 years old, I had two young children under the age of 3 at home, and I was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, just playing part-time. And then my husband came home, and he said he lost his job. And so then it's like, whoa, how do we survive? And there weren't any other jobs. It was during the oil crisis, and we were in the automotive industry. He was, and there was no other jobs. So I got a job as a secretary of a very small community hospital. And I decided I better go to school full time at the same time. So I went to school and I worked full time. And 7 years later, I had my bachelor's degree and my master's, and I was the chief operating officer of this very small hospital. I did that. And then actually that year, we had some tragedies. So my mother died, my husband's mother died, and my husband's brother died, all in the
Oh,
same
gosh.
year. And
Wow.
suddenly I realized I had done a bit of a bait and switch because I had gone to work and started school to give my family stability. And 7 years later, I look back and said, wow, my kids are growing up. I've been only working and going to school. And there's nothing left of me. And now I'm grieving. And so we made a switch, and my husband went back to work, and I started a PhD program so that I could have a lot more flexibility with the kids. So I went through, I became a professor. I taught statistics, and then I was doing consulting, and that was my foray into industry because the automotive industry in Detroit was just starting to look at Toyota because they were losing market share.
Mhm.
And I was asked to come in and look at a tier one supplier, there are 12 plants in Michigan, and see how we could do what Toyota was doing. And during my master's degree, the program had 3 weeks over in Japan at Toyota, and we studied Toyota when there were very few Americans over there. So I was able then to start looking at that, and I developed this program, and the company went on to win the Michigan Quality Leadership Award. So that's when Textron came to me and offered me a job, actually, that I couldn't refuse because they wanted to transfer me to Paris, France, and do the same thing in France and Germany in
Oh, wow.
manufacturing plants there. And my youngest was just going to college. So from there on, Textron has so many businesses, all heavy industry, aerospace, Cessna, Bell. I was in their mining and their fluid and power, which is the big nuclear pumps. And I had an office in South Africa with a dirt floor, all of that. And then to Union Pacific. So the last 20 years of my career, I was primarily in manufacturing plants with steel-toed boots and hard hats.
Well, then that sounds like a fascinating, fun, challenging, exciting, frustrating journey
All of
all
it.
in one. And, I'd like to go back to where you started, a mother with young children working. going to school. Wow. I mean,
Yeah, it was a lot. Yeah, but you do what you have to do at whatever stage you are in your life. If your livelihood and your children's livelihood depends on it, you do what you have to do. Yeah. So
I know I'm getting off topic a little bit here, but this is why I love speaking with women such as yourself. It just shows the resilience, determination, the grit that we women have. We step
we have
up and
it.
we do what needs to be done, right?
Exactly. I mean, heavy industry was a piece of cake after all of
Yeah, there you go. After motherhood, piece of cake. But I will get us back on track a little bit
Okay.
and say that, heavy industry isn't a field that we traditionally think of women going into.
Right.
What are some of the main challenges that women face when working in this sector?
Right. There are so many challenges. I mean, some of the hardest are like sexual discrimination,
Mm,
sexual harassment, um, even unintended bias. Some of it is just the guys don't even know what to do with you, especially if you're the first one in their crew or their team or their whatever. If you're the only one, they don't know. Sometimes they treat you with kid gloves, so many times, a guy will swear in front of a bunch of people standing around. I'm the only woman. He swears, he looks at me. Oh, I'm sorry. They treat you differently. Um, and then just also the company isn't really set up for women, and there's no good way to report if you're having problems without getting you ostracized. So there are challenges, of course. There are.
well, and I imagine that there are misconceptions or stereotypes about women in heavy industry. Is that something that you've seen?
I have seen, and I would say one of the biggest misconceptions that I find or that I believe is that so women shouldn't go into heavy industry, right?
Mm.
So women say, "Oh, I don't want to go into heavy industry. It's too male, it's too tough, it's too hard, it's too whatever." And I think there are huge advantages for women to go into heavy industry, and if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, right? Yeah.
Well, for women that are drawn to this industry, what are some of the factors that would bring them in or make them want to dip their toe into it?
Yeah. So I think that first of all, most at least in all the heavy industry I've been into. So just to recap, it's been aerospace, manufacturing, automotive, mining. I mean, all of those. It's always fast moving. Like it's where the rubber meets the road. You can't wait for 2 weeks to make a decision or even one day. It's often we got to get this to the customer because we're going to shut down a line that's going to cost us $1 million a minute if we shut it down. I mean, or we've got a crisis over in the mine and we got to get a gearbox to them. It feels like you're constantly using quick problem solving. You're moving, it's fast, and it's an adrenaline rush, frankly. It's exciting. There are a lot of cool things about being in heavy industry. It's hard, but it's rewarding. And I got to tell you, I loved it. I loved it. It was a good industry. It was a good fit for me. And let me tell you too, when so yeah, my daughter is also, she's an engineer and she's been in aerospace and
Oh,
and and what and what's so interesting is that she and I have had the same experience. You meet all of these people and they're all guys and eventually they all look the same. And so, you'll then go back to a plant or go back somewhere and then they say, and you say, "Hi, how are you?" And they say, "Oh, I've met you before." Well, yeah, because I'm the only woman, right? Of course, you met me. I don't remember you. And so you stand out. And if you do a good job, you can really get visibility. They need a token woman, so you're the one who presents and you're the one that
mm.
greets the luminaries, and you end up having, if you can handle it, you can have a lot of visibility and you can actually be very successful.
Well, and you touched upon some of the challenges already that women face in heavy industry, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced personally, and how did you handle them?
Well, early on, in early days, sexual harassment was rampant. I remember just in my very first job, every time I would be in a meeting and walk by this one vice president, he would like touch my rear end. Like it was
Oh,
like, are you kidding me? But everybody saw him do it and nobody said a word and nobody stopped him. And I was a little, young woman, did not know how to handle it. There are better paths now, and there are better, there's HR paths. But more recently, I have a friend who runs HR for a heavy industry organization, and she was propositioned by one of the guys in the company. She's head of HR. It's like, are you
wow.
kidding me? So it does still happen. So in terms of ways to handle things, anything like sexual harassment, you have to stop it immediately. You just have to, and not go to HR immediately, right? Go to the person and shut it down as much as you can. And there are people in power, but if you let it go on, it gets worse for you. And then you can't, it's very hard to shut it down. So that's the one thing. The other thing is just the everyday like discrimination, or guys like losing face because you're the woman and you correct them and stuff like that. And so what I always tried to do, and I think things are changing, so maybe these are not as relevant, but I I I would always handle it with humor. And I think that every woman has to find their authentic voice. You can't just imitate the guys. I mean, when we were starting, every woman had those little bow ties. You look at photos of women in the 80s in the industry, and we all had those little those little bows at our neck
Oh,
because
really?
it's like those little bows that we all had
Yeah.
them. All of
Oh,
our
I remember. I
blouses,
can picture those.
yeah, that we all had them because we were imitating the guys. And the thing is that it doesn't do for us to be imitating the guys, because women have a lot of cool things and good things that we bring to the workforce. But I do say you have to watch the guys. You can benchmark them, right? See, how does the guy handle this situation? And then find your authentic voice and handle it your way. And it means you're strong and you stand up for yourself. But I would try to do all my confrontations in private. I never grandstanded. I never did it in front of a bunch of guys, because then the guy gets all defensive. But you find a way to work through all of that. And I often found guys that were supportive of me in my career, and I'd ask for advice. Hey, how do you handle this person? Let me tell you what happened to me. What would you do? And I would really try to draw on people that I knew, that I trusted, that could help me.
Well, it sounds like things have improved, but it also
Yeah.
sounds like there is still room for cultural shifts to happen. What steps should leadership be taking to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for women in heavy industry?
There are quite a few things. So I can tell you in one's. Let me just give you a micro example and then give you
Mm-hmm.
some categories. But we decided to deep dive on data at Union Pacific in terms of women, and what we found was that there was a whole lot of women that were getting ready to retire that were in our hardest jobs, which is running the trains, engineers, conductors.
Okay.
It's a hard job for women, often more so than men if they have young children or they're single mothers, because the schedules are unsteady. It's long.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to not, it's not reliable of when you're going to get home every day. It's not a 9 to 5 job. And we found that we had hard time retaining women in those jobs. So we started looking at, okay, where are all of our women? So one of the things companies can do is deep dive in your data specifically around women. Just micro slice it and figure out what's going on. And what we found is there was a big move in the 70s and 80s to hire women as conductors and engineers. And then that stopped because we started getting women and we started getting critical masses in certain places. And we found that if we hire just one engineer in a whole group of men, they're not going to last. They're not going to stay. But if we can hire 3 or 4, then they've got a group that they can have just a bonding experience with. So the other thing we found as we deep dove is we talked to people that were leaving, women that were leaving from those jobs. We found out that weirdly, some of the locomotives had non-private bathroom situations on the
Oh.
locomotive, and you're on that locomotive for 12 hours at a time. So,
Yeah.
so then those things that nobody ever thought about, right? So you start talking to people. So I believe in exit interviews for all women that leave if you've got very few women in your organization. Find out what's going wrong. Get a good chain in terms of feedback. How do we get feedback? Maybe we do focus groups with women periodically. Maybe we give every woman a peer mentor or else somebody, a woman that's higher up that they can call if there's problems in the organization. We try to give them support. We can get women together periodically into larger groups and have peer mentoring, succession planning, target women for key positions and get them trained, get them the skills. If it's a field position, what certifications do they need? But you need to focus. In heavy industry, there's so few, and it's getting better, but you need to have a really sharp focus on what are we going to do.
And it sounds like mentoring and infrastructure are vital for retention in heavy industry when it comes to women.
Agreed. Yeah. Absolutely. And then, of course, childcare, paternity leave, good maternity leave, scheduling, being able to do, two people get equal one full-time job, all of those kind of creative ways to help women, particularly single mothers, because they're often really good paying jobs. At Union Pacific, we, up until just a year or two ago, we still had pension plans for people. I mean, really good paying jobs, um, but sometimes not conducive to all women.
And are there particular soft skills that are especially valuable for women pursuing careers in heavy industry?
I think for the soft skills, uh, women just need to really watch and understand how things are happening in the organization, understand the culture. I am not a fan of jumping right in, acting like I know how to do everything. I think for me, I've had much more success when I've started a new job or in a new area where just to start asking questions. It is so powerful because people love to tell you what they're doing and they love to show that they know stuff. And to come in and pretend you know it all, often it's kind of like we think we should do that because we don't want to appear weak and we want to appear confident. However, I think it takes more confidence and more strength to say, hey, show me how. I don't understand this manufacturing process. Can you walk me through it? And then ask questions all the way around to really deepen your understanding. And then you've not only created somebody who could be a mentor to you or could be a help, but you've also not ticked them off and walked right in and said, why are you doing that? Or why are you, sometimes I see women trying to be confident and they misunderstand how they can um, gain support, because confidence is great, but support is what you need oftentimes just to get you started till people trust you. And I find the more that the guys trust you and respect you, the easier it gets. Absolutely.
And it sounds like part of that is also comes back to what you mentioned before about taking the time to find your authentic voice.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in that. It can't be the same for every woman or everybody. It has to really be you. Feel comfortable.
And I can imagine that is very challenging when you are perhaps the only woman in a room full of men and you do want your voice to be heard, to find that balance between being assertive and I don't want to say aggressive, but well, just again, how to find that right tone.
Exactly. And the other thing that I would often do, like if I knew I was going into a meeting where I often got talked over, or the whole thing where the guy steal your idea and says
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
his or whatever. Eventually you do make good friends with the guys. And so I would go into the meeting ahead of time. I go to a guy's office. I say, listen, watch and see if this happens to me. Maybe it's my imagination, but I'm feeling this way. And could you, as my buddy, step in? If you hear that, say, "Oh yeah, Lynn just mentioned that," or "Hey, just a minute, I want to hear what Lynn says." And I would have people kind of help me. I mean, because the guys help each other, right? I mean, they do. So, what's wrong with eliciting support ahead of a hard meeting or a tough meeting?
Well, certainly making those allies.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Lynn, as you sort of look back over your career and some of those challenges we talked about, Are there any particular notable success stories or examples that stand out of women who've overcome some of these challenges or have achieved significant positions in the heavy industry?
Yeah, there are, and actually there's steady progress being made. But I can talk to the railroad industry, which is really exciting because we now have our first female CEO of one of the railroads in the U.S. And
Oh,
she's Katie
okay.
Farmer, and she's at BNSF, which is the railroad that's owned by Warren Buffett and was Union Pacific's major competitor, but that's okay. And she just got from the industry Railroader of the Year award. So out of all everybody in the railroad industry, she got the award, and that's a really big deal. She's good. I actually served on a board with somebody who'd mentored her for a while, and he said she's the real deal. And he said I gave her opportunities to shine. I helped her along because I really believed that she had what it took to lead BNSF, and sure enough, she got the job. She was at the railroad 31 years, has been so far, and it was her first job out of college. So talk about, overcoming a lot of hurdles. And basically, if you look at her success, she has had a job in every department in the railroad. So what's cool about that, and that's unusual for the guys even, is she made it a point to be as well-rounded as she could. And, it's always hard when you're in a job to take a job laterally or
Hmm.
even sometimes take a step back in another department. But she made sure she had an experience base that I think there are very few people, if no one, probably has that type of experience base at her railroad. At least it would have been fairly unusual at Union Pacific. But she made a point of that, and that gave her a competitive advantage in addition to the skill set she already had. That's exciting to see.
Well, it is wonderful to see that she's finally receiving that recognition that she so clearly deserves and worked hard to get.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Well, Lynn, as we start to wrap up today, what advice would you give to young women who are perhaps considering a career in a heavy industry field, but might be concerned about the potential obstacles that they could face, sort of like what we discussed today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if they're considering it, then keep, don't back down right away. Look at it. I think it's good to look at the different companies because every one is different. And at Textron, we had so many businesses. I would find that the culture at Bell Helicopter was different than the culture at Cessna Aircraft. I mean, you've got different cultures, and when you're interviewing, my favorite question to ask was always what is the culture here? Because what I would find is that if I could get consistency on what people said the culture is, that probably was the culture. And I think you want to look for a culture that where they value diversity, where that there's development and growth opportunities, and then all of the other skill sets that you bring come and play. And if someone is preparing for one, I think you can't go wrong with STEM. Um, but there's jobs in heavy industry in every area. You don't have to have only the mathematical kind of engineering things. You can go in finance, or well, finance would be STEM, but HR or communications or other areas like that. But I think your career path will be you'll stand out more if you go into an area that's pretty much predominantly male.
All right. Well, Lynn, well, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this topic. And I love that piece of advice you gave, to really ask about the culture of an organization and hopefully see if it's a good fit.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Michelle.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. We release 2 episodes a month available to watch on YouTube, and you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on your favorite streaming service. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe today, and follow along with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you for listening. The Women's Leadership Today podcast is just one feature of the Women's Leadership Today community. We empower women to advance in their career through targeted professional development learning experiences and resources, such as live and on-demand courses, customized training solutions, up-to-date publications, and more. Visit womensleadershiptoday.com to join our community and take your career to the next level. Together, we can empower women everywhere to lead, innovate, and inspire change.